Hi, I'm Paul Stringfellow, and welcome to another edition of Tech Takeaways. So, on this week's show, we're going to pick up on a topic with the same guest, actually, that we had last week, where we looked at some of the wins about rolling out Microsoft Copilot, specifically Copilot for 365. Some of the things that have worked well within that. But what we want to explore this week are some tips around the valuable lessons about if you are going to adopt this kind of technology, the things you might want to think about to not necessarily ensure success, but to certainly raise your chances of success. So to do that, I'm rejoined again this week by Nathan Miller. Hi, Nathan. How you doing?
And not bad again. Thank you for having me back again, Paul. I must have done something right the first time.
Indeed, and the second time, and here we are for three's a charm, as they say. So Nathan, I mean, just before we kick off, just maybe for somebody who hasn't seen you and who didn't watch last week's episode, so go back and watch that after you've watched this one. Do you want a quick introduction to who you are and what it is you do?
Excellent. Yeah, I won't be lazy and to go back or insert from last video. But yeah, Nathan Miller, Microsoft Program Manager at Bytes, working with Bytes, Microsoft, and our resellers and customers to ensure that we're all sort of be able to take advantage of new Microsoft products or different go-to-markets or sort of different funding streams and opportunities that are available within the Microsoft stack.
And that is, we could have inserted that from last week, but Nathan wanted to do it again, so that's all good. And plus, it would have made our editing team's life much more difficult to insert here. So what we wanted to do, and we talked about this kind of last week, that you're not coming at this with theoretical knowledge or kind of knowledge shared through sharing presentations with customers. Actually, as an organisation at Bytes, you've also adopted Copilot, and I think what we wanted to kind of touch on in this was some of the valuable lessons that you've learned in terms of doing that rollout. I mean, both things you've seen when working with customers, but also what you've seen internally in terms of the rollout you've done. And maybe just to set a little bit of context for the rollout you've done. You've not done this to one or two people. You're quite a big organisation and you've rolled out Copilot quite a lot. So maybe start there. Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what elements of Copilot and to what side kind of scale of rollout you've done?
Yes, that's a very good question. So in terms of different rollouts that we've done, it's very it's a very sort of wide scope. We've worked with customers just rolling out sort of 5 or 10 users to a company, and not everyone is like this, my stress, that are rolling out sort of 20,000. So everything in between. What's interesting is that 20,000 and the 5 user probably still have some of the same sort of issues or obstacles to actually leap over. So yeah, smallest maybe been 5 to 10 users, biggest being 20,000, and any type of customer in between across probably every sector in the UK as well. So we're starting to get quite a lot of data back and lots of responses back. We've also got the renewal window for the early adopters as well. So we're getting we're seeing the trends on how are people renewing. Did they sort of jump at this on day one and think this is amazing? And then in 12 months' time, thinking, no, that's half the number. So we're starting to see that trickle through as well. So it's quite an interesting time to be having this conversation.
Yeah, and I think so. There's a couple of things I think in that we'll pick up on. I think that will be kind of the basis of this episode. Actually, I think something you said that was really interesting, that between your own rollout and then you've worked on rollouts with companies who've got 5. They've rolled out to 5 and they've rolled out to 20,000, but there's some consistent elements to those rollouts that you've seen. I think it'd be interesting that we dip into those. But the other thing that I wanted to look at was you're just talking about there. So you're starting to see now some renewals of those early adopters, and there's some trends in that. So what are some of the trends that you're seeing in terms of how Copilot has rolled out and how it's been, and probably its success in terms of doing that?
It was still early days into these sort of renewals happening, because the original sort of purchase date being November last year. So people are coming up to those early adopters are coming up for renewal now. What we're seeing is we're not seeing a downtick yet, which I thought people might have jumped in, especially those enterprise customers that had to buy 300. Microsoft stipulated, this is your minimum order. Don't get me wrong, if the customer's got 100,000 users, 300 is probably not that much, but enterprise customers can be smaller than that. You could have a 500 user org that's been forced to buy 300 on day one. So I thought that we'll see some decreases or some true downs, as Microsoft said. We're not yet seeing that. Everything's going up, so that's positive. We're not seeing. So if we take, for example, some of the ones that had bought 300, whereas they maybe have 1,000 or 2,000 users, we're not seeing the leap to full company-wide yet. Over the last year, we have seen some companies sort of really go for it. And, we saw one, within like 3 months, we saw one company like, yes, we're going for this, and full on covered every single user. That is definitely the exception and not the rule. You see one or two doing it, but we're seeing a cautious, especially the enterprise customers. Some of them may have not quite managed to get all 300 covered yet, but it's, well, in a few months' time, I will have them covered. So we're just going to assign the licenses, at renewal. So plus on Microsoft, we're not seeing a downtake yet. There's still, more renewals coming in, but we're not seeing this. I've had a year to, assess these 300, and I'm going to jump to 3,000. We're seeing this 300 goes to 310 or 350 or something like that. So we're seeing a gradual increase in the different licensing methods. The non-enterprise customers who didn't have to buy that minimum 300, they're sort of going on the trickle of 5 here, 5 there, 5 there sort of thing, which is probably customers trying to get the balance right on getting enough people to actually test it to get a bigger sample size against cost, because it's not the cheapest thing out there.
I think that's really interesting data. That I think I think it's interesting in two ways. I think not seeing a drop off is interesting because I'm with you. I think it's very easy that people kind of got wrapped up in the marketing hype, and we'll touch on that in a second. The marketing hype and going, well, this must be, this is not a go at Microsoft, because actually the whole hype around ChatGPT and these kind of generative AI tools, there's a massive hype around that. And you can see how people just kind of leapt in and went, great, let's have some of that because it'll change our lives. But it's interesting to see that you've not seen a massive drop off where they've bought 300 licenses yet. I mean, maybe we that still might be a thing, but they bought 300 licenses and now they don't want any, or they want 5, but which would be an interesting story in itself about how we got there. But you're also not seeing the massive leap. So potentially, where they've had to buy 300, perhaps they got their balance right relatively early on, which is interesting. And so we'll kind of come into that because I think there's lessons there about why that might have been a success that I think you'll be able to give some insight on. But one thing I did want to touch on, and we talked about this actually before we started recording, and I didn't want to forget to talk about this. One of those things was the marketing versus the reality, and you gave me a couple of really good examples before we started recording. So when we talk about the marketing of, and this is about Microsoft Copilot specifically, so when we talked about the marketing of Copilot and the reality, what was it that you meant, and what's important for customers to appreciate?
I think if we look at Microsoft marketing, and let's be quite clear, Microsoft is a very big company. They've probably got a massive marketing budget, and Copilot is the number one marketed product for them, or it feels like it anyway. It's everywhere. It's everywhere, and some of the features that we saw. So if we go back to, so it launched in November. I mean, it was probably announced June or July, and there was those months and months of should we say the hype cycle or whatever. But some of the features we saw in the original marketing have only just become live now. So it's like, if you'd have bought it on November, and two to call out is how it works in PowerPoint and how it works in Excel. If you're using Copilot now, you'll notice that that's now in general availability. Had you bought it in November, that was in preview. So you're basically paying for a preview product, and you're giving Microsoft all the telemetry and how this preview product works. And now when Microsoft launched the Wave 2 marketing event a few weeks ago, I'm going to say that probably 70 or 80% of what was announced was previously announced, but it's now live. So, maybe if you bought it in November thinking, I can't wait to do this PowerPoint, I can't wait to get it to rebrand PowerPoints into my own sort of branding and content creation, might be a bit disappointed when you see this Wave 2 and you're like, oh, that thing that I've been paying for has been in preview. So that's the sort of, we said, Instagram versus, reality, or marketing versus reality. If you'd have bought it for that in November, I remember seeing, Excel, I can ask it. I'm looking at, sales yield for 6 months across these sectors and these territories. Can you help me? And it wasn't actually there in November last year, but it was advertised and it was in all the videos. So there's that sort of what was advertised last year versus, what's only just available now. Don't get me wrong, it was there. Everything that was offered Teams, for example, was there and live on day one. But, Excel has been in, a public preview for a year. Same with PowerPoint. So the feature you'll see now of, here's a Word document, turn this into a PowerPoint, but keep my branding. Partly a day one feature that's, maybe actually took 6 months before it turned up in private preview. So there's that. And some customers did express a little bit of a disdain for that. But for the last 6 months, it probably has worked. It's just had brackets in preview. So there's that to be considered, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And again, Microsoft aren't the only ones who do this. But I think that it sounds like such a basic thing, but I think if you're not looking for it, it's a really good point to raise, that if you are going to buy into this technology for something very specific, do make sure that something very specific actually exists in general availability as opposed to just in preview, because a lot of the time those previews can just be not all customers can get them. It's only certain customers will be able to get them. Make sure even if you want to take the preview product, make sure you're in the kind of tranche of types of customers who can get a preview. I think it's a great tip. So, so in terms of some of the things that you've seen, and let's do, we talked about all the positives in the last episode. So let's do a couple of negatives, So in terms of, but we'll try and turn it around into a success, So, turn that frown upside down, Nathan. That's what we're going to do. So in terms of making this work, what are some of the mistakes that, in your experience now, what are some of the mistakes to try and avoid to make sure you get the best out of rolling Copilot out across an organization?
I briefly touched on this on the previous episode, but probably for about 30 seconds. I'll say expectation management / picking the right people to be in your preview, because you're probably not going to say, okay, I've got 100 users, buy me 100 Copilot licenses, because it's expensive. You might be on business standard, business premium. That's about £15 a month. Can you buy an add-on for £30 a month, just like that? Maybe not. So it's being selective on who you pick. I know this is like counterintuitive because you probably need the MD or the CEO to sign off on this product in the first place. But as briefly discussed, they might not be the ideal candidates for this. So it's pick people across different teams to get a different result. Like, don't just pick the sales team. Pick multiple people across different teams. And pick people that are sort of, we said, in the weeds every day and using the applications. I would resist the urge to just buy one license or buy 2 licenses. If we take us, for example, we had slightly different rules on buying Copilot. As a partner, we managed to qualify for some extra sort of Microsoft programs because we were going to do the workshops as well. So the message back to Microsoft is, we probably can't buy 300 on day one, but you need us to help you deploy it because, the whole partners make possible and all that stuff that Microsoft's there. So we managed to buy 50 instead of 300, which is good. And I can talk about it now because some enterprise customers got on it at the time, but they don't have to do that now. So we managed to buy less than 300. So we managed to get 50. So 50 for us probably represented 10% of the business. And then we cherry picked across 5 or 6 departments. So, multiple people from each department. So don't just go for just the sales team, just the marketing, because you will get one response. But don't just go for them and expect them to just do it, because what happens is, I did it, we all did it, got it on day one, and the first thing you do is test it. But then on day 2, you go back to normal work.
Yeah.
Because I don't have to learn something. I'm going to have to learn something new. So I got it slightly earlier than most of the people at Bytes because I thought I'd be the perfect use case because I'd been on holiday for 2 weeks. So I was like, let's see how good it really is in Outlook. So I'd come back on day 1, didn't want to read any of those emails, so I'll get Copilot to do it. And it did a pretty good job, actually. You got to ask it the right thing, but it was like, tell it, I've been away for 2 weeks, and what have I missed? Highlight all the emails and go from highest to lowest in terms of importance. I was quite pleased with that. It brought back some good results, and I worked like that for a few days. I got caught up, and I was like, okay, back to working how I did before. So if there's nobody at the top or there's no sort of community built, you will test it. Probably not. Hopefully you like it, unless your expectation was up here and it's going to do everything for me, which is another one. We said unrealistic expectations. But have a rollout plan. So once you've picked the people across the different teams, don't just say, you've got a license, enjoy, because they will enjoy it for 1 day, for 2 days, and then they'll go back to doing what they're doing. So you need to build a community amongst those people, because depending on the size of the customer, they might not all talk to each other on a daily basis. Sales might not speak to marketing, marketing might not speak to accounts, finance, etc. So what we did is you build like a Teams channel. You put everyone in it, and then you have someone own it, the person that's driving the change, and they have to be on it, and they have to be one of those people that overly communicates. You've got to be, this person's just done a really good prompt. Here's what it is. And you've got to sort of force people to sort of, start using it by what their peers are doing. Because not everyone has chance to sit back and be like, I'm just going to spend half an hour thinking of this amazing prompt. Not everyone works like that, and people are differently. So people are different. So that sort of rollout across multiple departments, actually commit to it, because if you get it right, you will see a return on investment, and sort of overly communicate, build this community of Copilot early adopters, set up some sort of monthly meeting, or have this team channel to just constantly feed. If it's not like prompts, this person's done this really good prompt, this person's done this good use case, just keep on sharing links. So Microsoft have done this new product or this new feature. There's always going to be a new feature, and it's just that sort of oversharing for that person. Hammer people, and they will eventually start to use it. It's probably the wrong message. Hammer people and they'll use it. But it is that if you leave them to their own devices, they'll probably think it's cool, and then they won't use it for another week. So it's that continual adoption and change management is a big thing.
Well, I think, Nathan, you've been on Tech Takeaways enough that you realise that the question I was going to ask you at the end was, give us some takeaways, and you just summarise. You co-piloted yourself and summarised the whole thing brilliantly there. So I think absolutely some brilliant tips there, Nathan. Really appreciate that. If people want to find out more about what you do, want to kind of keep up with the messaging you're putting out there around things like Copilot, what's the best way to do that?
Probably reach out on LinkedIn. That'd be the easiest way. Sort of always available. Open to connect. Just reach out and have a conversation.
Great stuff. And if this has whetted your appetite about Copilot and how to find out about successful rollout and how to get the best out of that, then do check out our event that's coming up on Thursday, November the 7th. You'll be able to join us, and Nathan and some of his colleagues from Bytes will be talking about kind of getting success of Copilot rollout. We'll make sure that the links to that event go in the show notes. But Nathan, for now, thanks again for being on the show with us. Really appreciate it. And if you want to make sure you catch all future episodes of Tech Takeaways, then do subscribe. If you've got any comments around Copilot and anything you want us to cover, then do put it in the show notes. You can do that right here on YouTube. So in the comments, you can't write the show notes. That's our job. So do put it in the comments on here. And of course, you can subscribe to the audio version of Tech Takeaways in all good homes of podcasts. But until next time, thanks for joining us.